What if the most powerful superfood on Earth wasn't just forgotten, but was deliberately erased? This is the story of a single plant that built empires, terrified conquerors, and then vanished for 500 years. And the secret to its disappearance is the exact reason we desperately need it back. The grain that fed empires. There was a time when the fields of the Americas looked very different. Long before the endless industrial rows of corn and soy, another plant stood tall, its crimson tassels painting the landscape. This wasn't just a crop, it was the backbone of empires. The Aztec, the Maya, and the Inca all depended on it. In fact, Spanish chroniclers arriving in the 1500s were stunned to find this single plant covered as much as 80% of Aztec farmland. It was called Huautli by the Aztec, or Kiwicha by the Maya. To us, it is known as Amaranth. This was no simple staple. It was revered as a complete survival package, a gift from the gods that held the people together. Its seeds packed more protein than corn, and its leaves offered more iron than spinach. It was ground into flour for long journeys, used as medicine for the sick, and held a sacred place in their most important rituals. It was, in every sense of the word, life. But this powerful plant, once strong enough to fuel entire civilizations, was systematically erased. Its strength was seen as a threat, its sacred role a blasphemy. Today we walked through supermarkets filled with corn syrup and soybean oil, completely unaware that we lost something far more powerful. We've all but forgotten this ancient supercrop, replacing it with foods that are simpler but far less resilient. And what made this plant so powerful wasn't just one feature, but its incredible, almost unbelievable efficiency. The double harvest plant. In a modern garden, a plant usually gives you one thing, a fruit, a root, or a leaf. But older farming wisdom valued efficiency above all else. They didn't have the luxury of specialization. They had the need for survival. And they knew about a plant that gave twice. Amaranth isn't just one plant, but a family of ancient species, some cultivated for over 6,000 years. Its practical genius was in the double harvest. Throughout the long, hot summer, families could harvest the tender young leaves. These greens were a vital food source, packed with vitamins and minerals, often providing more calcium and iron than spinach. This alone would make it a valuable crop. But the real treasure came in the fall. After the leaves were harvested, the plant would produce enormous, heavy seed heads. A single stalk could yield a staggering 100,000, sometimes 200,000, tiny seeds. One well-tended acre could produce thousands of pounds of high-protein grain. It was a plant that fed you all season long. This double harvest provided a sheer volume of food, but the quality of that food is where the real secret lay. The complete protein. We were all taught that corn ruled the Americas. It was the tall, golden crop that built civilizations. But the old-timers, the ones who farmed for sheer survival, knew a secret. Corn on its own was incomplete. This wasn't just an old wives' tale. It was ancestral knowledge, now proven by modern science. When you look at the numbers, corn has about 9% protein. Amaranth, by contrast, contains 14 to 16%, nearly double. But the real difference, the one that changes everything, is a single amino acid, lysine. Lysine is essential for human life, an amino acid our bodies cannot make on their own. Without it, a protein is incomplete. Corn, for all its bulk, simply does not provide it. Amaranth does. This made it a true, complete protein, a rare thing in the plant kingdom. You could live on it. You could build muscle on it. It was a perfect food, all in one plant. This complete protein was found in its grain, but its leaves held an entirely different and equally potent set of nutrients. Better than spinach. Today, superfood greens mean kale or spinach, trucked across the country and sold in plastic clamshells. We pay a premium for these delicate leaves, believing they are the peak of nutrition. But in the ancient American garden, there was a hardier, healthier, and far more practical green, one that most people now mistake for a common weed. This was the other half of the amaranth's double harvest. Long before the grain was ready, farmers harvested the tender young leaves. This wasn't a bonus crop, it was a primary food source, and the nutritional facts are astounding. Modern analysis shows that amaranth greens contain more iron than spinach, and, incredibly, twice the calcium. They are also loaded with vitamins A and C. It was a true powerhouse green that grew with almost no effort. thriving in the heat where lettuce and spinach would bolt and wither. It fed families all season long, a fresh, reliable source of vitamins right outside their door. This combination of perfect grain and perfect green made it the ultimate survival food, one that could be concentrated and carried anywhere. The warrior's energy bar. Long before plastic-wrapped protein bars and sugary energy drinks, Aztec warriors had something far more potent. It was small, portable, and kept them alive on grueling marches when failure was not an option. This was the original power food, a recipe that survives today in Mexico as a sweet treat called alegría, or joy. But for the Aztec, this was a pure, potent function. They would skillfully pop the tiny amaranth seeds, like miniature popcorn, and bind them with rich honey or agave syrup. These nutrient-dense cakes were then packed tight. This was the perfect survival ration. It was incredibly lightweight, yet calorie-dense, and loaded with the complete protein that only Amaranth could provide. Soldiers and imperial messengers, running hundreds of miles, carried these cakes as their primary fuel. It was not a snack. It was a strategic, life-sustaining ration that provided real, lasting energy. This made it the perfect food for a long journey, but its true genius was how long it could last, without any journey at all. The long keeper's grain. Before there were refrigerators, chemical preservatives, or plastic tubs, the most important trait of any food was its keep. How long would it last you through the dark, cold winter, when the fields were bare? This wasn't a matter of convenience. It was a matter of survival. After the amaranth was harvested, its tiny precious seeds were carefully threshed and dried. They weren't bagged in plastic. They were stored the old-fashioned way, sealed in cool, dry clay jars and tucked away in dark granaries. And here, amaranth proved its superiority. It was a long keeper's dream. Its hard, tiny seeds, when kept dry, could last for years. They naturally resisted the insects and mold that would so often spoil the larger, softer corn kernels. Archaeologists have uncovered amaranth in ancient storage pits, stored right alongside maize, and have often found it far better preserved than the corn itself. This was true food security. This ability to survive after harvest was matched only by its incredible ability to survive before it. The plant that refused to die. Any farmer will tell you that corn is a thirsty, fragile plant. It demands fertile soil and steady rain. One bad drought, one long, scorching heat wave, and an entire harvest can collapse into dust. This is why ancient farmers, who understood the cruel whims of nature, always kept an insurance policy. That insurance was amaranth. This was the stubborn survivor, the plant that refused to die, even when the land turned cruel. Its biological genius was its toughness. Unlike corn's shallow roots, amaranth sends a deep taproot plunging down, sometimes 6 feet or more, sucking up moisture hidden far below the surface. It thrives in poor, rocky soil and sips water, needing 30 to 50% less irrigation than maize. This wasn't just theory. Archaeologists studying the Great Drought of 1276 found that as tree rings showed corn crops collapsing across the southwest, amaranth pollen remained abundant. It was the literal lifeline. This plant was a perfect food in every way, nutritious, efficient, storable, and tough. So, why did it vanish? The answer has nothing to do with farming and everything to do with its color, the sacred red dye. Before chemical dyes came in plastic bottles, the most brilliant colors came straight from the earth. Long before store-bought food coloring, the Hopi and Zuni people of the Southwest knew exactly where to find a vibrant, sacred red. It wasn't mined from rock. It was harvested from the deep crimson flowers of the amaranth plant. These tassels, heavy with pigment, were gathered by hand and carefully processed. This wasn't just a plant. It was a palette, a piece of their identity. This dye wasn't simply for decoration, though it certainly found its way into their hand-woven fabrics, staining the threads with a color that held its ground. Its most important role, however, was sacred. The Hopi used this potent red to color their ceremonial piki bread. This thin, paper-like bread, a staple of their diet, was transformed by the amaranth dye, turning a simple food into a sacred object, a direct link to their rituals. This sacred role, using a flower to color bread, was a beautiful act of reverence. But this reverence went even deeper. to a level that would ultimately seal the plant's fate. The food of the gods. In the old world, some foods weren't just for eating, they were for worship. For the Aztec, Amaranth wasn't just another crop on the table. It was a divine gift, a direct link to the gods themselves. This reverence took physical form during their most important festivals, like the one honoring the war god Huitzilopochtli. Giant, life-sized statues of the deity were painstakingly sculpted, molded entirely from amaranth flower and sweet honey. These weren't just displayed and admired. After the proper rituals were performed, these massive figures were carefully broken apart and distributed to the entire community. The people ate their god. This wasn't just a feast, it was true communion, a way to literally internalize the power of the divine. It bound the people to their god and to each other, a shared sacred experience. This ritual, so sacred to the Aztec, was seen as a profound blasphemy by the Spanish, and they would not let it stand. The forgotten fields. For centuries, this plant was the backbone of empires, a sacred gift from the gods. But in the 1500s, when the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they didn't just see food, they saw a profound existential threat. The problem wasn't its nutrition or its resilience. It was its holiness. The Spanish watched in horror as the Aztec people molded amaranth and honey into statues of their gods and then ate them. To the conquistadors, this was a blasphemous pagan mockery of their own sacred Catholic communion. It was a ritual that, in their eyes, came directly from the devil, and so it had to be destroyed. Spanish authorities outlawed the cultivation of amaranth. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a brutal campaign. Anyone caught growing it faced severe punishment. Entire fields were burned to the ground, the crimson stalks turned to ash. The crackdown was terrifyingly effective. Colonial records show that production, which had once covered 80% of Aztec farmland, plummeted to almost nothing. The grain that had fed millions was systematically and violently erased from history, all but disappearing for the next 500 years. The fields were burned and the plant was outlawed. But you can't erase a plant that powerful. You can only hide it. The seeds in the clay pot. While Spanish authorities thought they had stamped out the sacred grain, they were wrong. In the remote, high deserts of the Southwest, the Pueblo, Hopi, and Zuni, farmers began a quiet, centuries-long act of resistance. They didn't grow it in big, obvious fields that would invite punishment. Instead, they practiced what we would now call resistance farming. A few precious stalks were tucked away, hidden behind tall rows of corn or mixed with squash plants, where a prying eye wouldn't look twice. The seeds themselves became treasures, treated with a reverence we can barely imagine today. They were no longer a bulk commodity. They were an inheritance. Families passed them down from mother to daughter, not in open sacks, but in small, carefully sealed clay pots, whispering the stories that went with them. They were wrapped in animal hides or tucked deep into the cool, dark recesses of their stone-walled homes, safe from discovery. This was a defiant, 400-year act of cultural survival, kept alive not by kings or scientists, but by quiet, stubborn families who simply refused to forget. And for centuries, that's where the story stayed, hidden in clay pots, until the modern world, in its search for superfoods, accidentally stumbled upon the secret they had been keeping, the modern rediscovery. For centuries, amaranth was hidden, a secret kept in clay pots. But in the 1970s and 80s, health experts and scientists began to discover what indigenous tribes had known all along. They ran it through their modern labs and were stunned by what they found. It was completely gluten-free, a perfect grain for millions who couldn't process wheat. It was packed with antioxidants and rare compounds like squalene, a substance linked to heart health. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration even studied it as a candidate for space farming, praising it as a perfect crop that provides both grain and greens in the harsh, contained environment of a shuttle. And in the markets of Mexico, they found the tradition still alive in the form of alegría. These joy bars, made of popped amaranth and honey, weren't some modern invention. They were the direct, unbroken descendants of the same energy cakes Aztec warriors once carried into battle. We've rediscovered a luxury product, but we've completely forgotten its place as a food that could feed everyone. So, if it's so good and we've rediscovered it, why isn't it everywhere today? The answer isn't in the plant. it's in our system. The crop that machines forgot. If Amaranth is so good, why don't we see fields of it stretching across America today? The answer has nothing to do with farming. It has everything to do with money and machines. When industrial agriculture took over in the 20th century, the crops that won weren't necessarily the best ones. They were the ones that fit the new model. Corn and wheat, with their uniform, heavy kernels, were perfect for the giant combines that stripped whole fields in hours. Amaranth, with its delicate tiny seeds, was a mechanical nightmare. It was fussy, shattering and scattering in the wind, and farmers reported losing up to half their harvest just trying to collect it. But the final blow wasn't mechanical, it was political. The system was built to favor the giants. Corn and soy received billions of dollars in government subsidies, guaranteeing stable profits. Amaranth got zero. We built a system that rejected the plant. But now, as that very system begins to fail, we are realizing it's the only one that can survive what's next. The climate-smart survivor. Today, our massive industrial food system is in trouble. We face hotter summers, harsher droughts, and unpredictable weather that our modern crops were never designed to handle. The fragile, thirsty plants we depend on, the corn, the wheat, the soy, are failing. We are learning a hard lesson that ancient people already knew. You cannot build a civilization on a plant that needs perfect conditions. And so, in our search for an answer, we are looking to the past. Scientists now have a name for this ancient wisdom. They call Amaranth a climate-smart crop. It still has those deep taproots that dig 6 feet down, searching for water. It still thrives in scorching heat and poor soil, producing thousands of pounds of food with a fraction of the water corn demands. It's the same tough, resilient survivor that got native peoples through their own climate disasters centuries ago. But here is the great tragic irony. The very plant we systematically tried to erase 500 years ago, the insurance policy we threw away, might be the only one that can save us. The plant we burned from the fields may be the only one that can survive the very world we're creating. But all the scientific data in the world, all the lab reports, are missing the most important piece of the puzzle. The wisdom keepers. All the scientific data in the world is missing the most important piece. The knowledge of how to truly use this plant was never just stored in the seed's genetics. It was stored in the people. This knowledge was carried, protected, and passed down by the wisdom keepers, the Pueblo, Hopi, and Zuni families who quietly guarded this plant for 500 years. They didn't just save the plant, they saved the manual. They know its rhythms. They know when to plant by the stars, not by a calendar. They know how to harvest the delicate seeds by hand, how to use the leaves for medicine, and how to use the flowers for sacred ceremonies. This ancestral, hands-on knowledge is the only key to unlocking the plant's true potential. But as we rediscover Amaranth today, in our rush to market it as a new superfood, we often forget the very communities that saved it. They didn't just save a plant, they saved an answer. And we are finally, 500 years later, learning to ask the right question. Perhaps the greatest thing we lost wasn't just food. It was the respect for the land and the profound, humble wisdom of the people who knew it best. And maybe that is the one tradition, more than any other, that we desperately need to bring back. These forgotten histories are more than just stories. They are roadmaps to a more resilient future. If you believe this lost wisdom is worth finding, like this video and subscribe for more secrets we were never meant to forget.